The owl is a strange creature. Okay, bear with me for a second. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. The owl is a strange creature. Where many birds sing their songs during the day, the owl is one of few who will chant their haunting hymns during the night. It is said in Polish folklore that they are the harbingers of death and misfortune, that they are the reincarnations of married women who died before their husbands. While one story tells of their relation to the satanic and profane, others tell of the owl as a victim of circumstance and tragedy. A bird too beautiful for the day's jealous birds, and so it lurks in the night, alone, where it cannot be seen as it laments under the moonlight. When we think of unfortunate creatures, we think of something tragic. However, sometimes there are creatures which are less of unfortunate souls themselves and more omens of misfortune. These can be normal critters like black cats, crows, and, as mentioned earlier, owls. But they can also be more fantastical creatures, such as Disir, Oni, and any type of fiendish creature in Christian folklore. There is the genie, who grants wishes, but whose wishes grant misfortune in the process. But between all of this folklore, it always seems like human beings are the most tragically unfortunate creatures of all. We tell stories of our encounters with gods, devils, and nature itself, almost all of which end in some sort of tragedy or twist of misfortunate fate. Old stories of Greek heroes never end too well. There's always a common theme of humility between all of these stories. A sense that humans can only ever ascend to a certain point before their hubris binds their ankles and misfortune knocks them back down. Oftentimes, these falls from grace are foreshadowed by the unfortunate creatures who symbolize that fall. From owls to black cats to ravens and crows and beyond, all of these creatures are meant to describe the phenomena of random chance. The idea that everything is meant to happen, and everything in the universe is a matter of cause and effect. A black cat crosses your path, and you find yourself crushed by a piano. You might see a crow outside your window upon the birth of your child, only to realize that your child is stillborn. Many of these creatures of misfortune are often as much a symbol of bad luck as they are the harbingers of it, and this is where we can apply it to our writing. However, it's best to ensure that even if we do have some bad luck, that we're prepared for the worst when it happens. That's why today's sponsor, Aura, can help out. I want you guys to think about a time when a company you trusted announced a data breach involving your personal information. What went through your mind as you processed the news? What actions did you take to respond? And most importantly, what actions did you not take to respond? Because not responding or taking any action in this moment right now could leave you vulnerable to future data breaches. After all, hackers may have stolen the social security numbers of every American. So if you live in America like I do, you might want to listen to what I have to say. Over 2.9 billion records were stolen from National Public Data, which offers personal information to employers, private investigators, staffing agencies, and others doing background checks. These stolen records include a person's full name, address, date of birth, social security number, and phone number, along with alternate names and birth dates. And members of the hacker group have reportedly released this information for free online. I don't know about you guys, but as a person who has had their passwords stolen in the past, that sort of thing is incredibly terrifying to me. Oftentimes we think it can't happen to us until it does, and we're left without any idea of what to do or who to call. Even if you're doing your best to keep your identity safe, things like this can still happen. And by the time you realize it has happened, it'll already be too late. That's why it's so important to get ahead of it and prepare for the worst. If you weren't taking precautions with your personal information online before, this should be a huge wake-up call. You've never been more vulnerable online than you are right now. But for me personally, I'm not too worried because I use Aura. Aura alerts me if my phone number, email, or social security number is on the dark web. They're going to let me know fast if anyone tries to use this information to get access to my credit or bank accounts. They also give me up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case scenario ever happen to me again. There's also a ton of other features to keep you safe online, all inside one easy-to-use app. You can go to my link, aura.com/scrit, to try 14 days for free. That will be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data has been exposed. I highly recommend you do this right now because not only is national public data not going to do anything to help you, they're probably not going to face any repercussions for this leak. And if there aren't any repercussions, that more than likely means it's going to happen again. I'm not leaving myself vulnerable to data breaches, and if you don't want to either, you can go to aura.com/scrit and try 2 weeks for free. Anyways, back to the rest of the video. Back on topic, let's talk a little bit more about how we can use creatures of misfortune in our writing, or how we can recognize it when we watch a show we enjoy. Crows and ravens are often used as background detail for an ominous place. They are used to the point of being cliché, even. You need a spooky graveyard? Ravens and crows. Need to set the tone with death and decay? Ravens and crows eating some corpses. Need to torture someone high above a castle wall in a cage to establish that this is very dark and gritty medieval fantasy? Ravens and crows. Even the caw of a raven or a crow is often utilized as a way to jump scare the characters and, by proxy, the audience before they are swiftly shown the real threat. So how can we maintain this symbolism while also not being too cliched? There are a few ways and a few ideas that I can think of, one of which is an example that I use in my own story. To make a very long story short, I often utilize animals and their symbolic meaning to associate certain characters in my book with those themes and symbols. One such character is known only as the Crow, who is heavily motivated by money and brings in an ill omen of death and despair upon the characters. They serve as an antagonist who is incredibly powerful, but who does not often exert that power over the much weaker main characters unless it is made worth their while by their employer. The Crow doesn't do anything unless there's a proper payment involved, and will often take flight if it means having to do something above their pay grade. This type of antagonist to your story can be very useful in a lot of ways. Firstly, it can establish the general power ceiling within your world, while also having a motivation to not kill the main characters prematurely. Secondly, this introduces a bit of nuance to your cast of villains. Someone who, when on screen, is a formidable and almost unbeatable threat, but who can be convinced to leave if the characters either bribe them or present enough trouble for them to decide that the characters are not worth the money being spent. A villain like this can also help you to maintain a sense of presence and power among your antagonistic cast because they are almost never directly defeated by the heroes. This type of character, who is driven by the highest bidder, can also be a good way to introduce the audience and the main characters to the true deadly foes of your story, the ones that you may or may not be planning to write about very, very far down the line. In other words, remember that the Crow or the Raven character is the harbinger of death, but not death itself. It tells of what is to come and provides a sufficient warning. And if you play Dungeons & Dragons, this type of character is a very cool encounter for the players since they provide a meaningful challenge and establish some motivation for the player party to continue the story, while also not completely shitting on the party with a TPK. When you turn a creature of misfortune into the motif of a certain character, remember the utility of their symbolic meaning and use that to feed the allegories present within your writing. Allow that symbolic meaning to guide the personality, motivations, and decisions of these characters, and you will find that your writing seems a lot more dynamic and nuanced, because, in a way, you've just made a character who exists outside of your ideas, one who acts as their own person rather than a piece of yourself. Another well-known creature of misfortune is the black cat. This trope is often lesser used, but also almost always hidden in plain sight when it is. Characters like Catwoman and Black Cat are literally the embodiments of what I was talking about earlier. They are characters which take on the motif of a creature of misfortune. A black cat is not intentionally malicious, but whoever's path they happen to cross, that person will end up getting hurt. We see this with both Spider-Man and Batman, respectively. Anytime they are in contact with these characters, they're often the ones who must bear the brunt of whatever misfortune they intentionally or unintentionally bring. Black Cat and Catwoman are both characters who are relatively neutral and who tend to be more on the side of good. In a lot of ways, they're tragic characters who cannot help but inflict pain and suffering upon the people they care about. It is in their nature. And it is a nature which the heroes of the story help them to unlearn at some point. So, when you're writing your own black cat type character, remember that their misfortune is something which follows them, and not something which they always intend to inflict. A black cat character simply walks their path, perhaps sometimes unknowing of their misfortune, or tragically knowing and unable to stop their misfortune without some help. I mentioned owls before, and there's a lot of symbolism and meaning behind owls beyond simple misfortune and death. That, I think, is what makes them such a prime candidate for characters. Barn owls were seen as birds of evil, ones who brought misfortune with them wherever they went. It's easy to think that they're cute until you see them at night and hear them screeching. However, beyond these themes of death and misfortune, an owl is also often associated with wisdom and cunning thanks to the Greek myths surrounding it, and its association with the goddess Athena. And oftentimes, the owl is a very tragic type of creature. However, beyond misfortune, death, and wisdom, I would also say that the hidden symbolism behind the owl is loneliness. There are parallels between all of the stories which depict owls as solitary creatures, and not always by choice. Athena is one of few goddesses who never has a lover nor a companion. The Polish myth that I described earlier in the video depicts owls as creatures who only come out during the nighttime because all the other birds would be too jealous of its beauty if it were seen during the day. Even more, the owl being a reincarnation of a married woman who died before their lover is one such person who is tragically alone and estranged from the person they loved. I think we can use this in our writing and go even deeper to say that an unfortunate tragedy of an owl-type character is that they are the ones who must lurk where no one can see them, but who often call out to warn others of impending doom. They might be mistaken as the ones who bring the misfortune, and they might even have trouble making meaningful relationships with others, even when they care deeply for them. An owl-type character is wise, and will use that wisdom to help others, but those who are unwise will mistake the owl's wisdom as a threat and chase them away. For your owl-type characters, I think it's best to remember this dynamic. These are characters who are generally good people and will attempt to do good, but who are often misunderstood. And because they are often misunderstood, they end up as victims of isolation and loneliness. Sometimes their solitude is a choice, as they know they may bring misfortune upon those they care for, while other times their wisdom, beauty, and compassion can become the ire of the other characters around them. Sometimes the truth is more offensive than a sweet lie. So, for owl-type characters, remember that they are never afraid to speak their minds or say what they think is right. They will warn and help other characters even if it means those characters might turn on them in the end. And yet, in their wisdom, the owl character is never caught off guard by such a thing. They are always one step ahead, and they know the misfortune your characters refuse to heed will do more damage than they ever could. Let's move on to the more mythical creatures of misfortune. Sometimes we can take these themes and symbols and create a new creature which represents them in our own fantasy worlds. One such example of a creature who borrows these themes of misfortune and death is Absol from Pokemon. Its original Pokédex entries will often allude to the fact that Absol is a symbol of misfortune within the Pokemon world, much in the same way that owls and black cats are in our own world. It's explained that, in ancient times, people often thought that Absol was a creature which caused natural disasters simply because they were always present when a natural disaster occurred. Later on, people soon discovered that it was not Absol who caused those natural disasters, but rather Absol who first understood and knew about those disasters before they could happen. Its horn is sensitive to such things, and being a relatively good-natured creature, as most Pokemon tend to be in the Pokemon world, it would often attempt to warn other people only to be tragically mistaken as the cause of those disasters. And so the Pokemon rarely ever ventures down from the mountains and often lives a solitary life. That sounds a little familiar to everything we've just discussed, doesn't it? And yet, Absol doesn't really look like any of the creatures we mentioned before. I mean, yeah, we've got a little bat-winged tail and a crescent moon-shaped horn and kinda cat-like body. Maybe owl feathers or something when it's mega evolved. Either way, it's an entirely new creature, and you can do this in your own stories. Not only does doing something like this help you to world build, but it also introduces a unique symbol that you can use in your story whenever appropriate. Once you've established this type of creature in your world, you can train your audience to recognize what its presence means and use it to foreshadow the events which will take place later on in the story. This is also another way to avoid the cliche of slapping a bunch of ravens and crows everywhere around a graveyard or a haunted house with some lightning in the background and an organ playing the Finally, let's talk about monsters and the supernatural. Things which are ill omens who bestow curses of misfortune upon people. Hags, witches, genii, even objects like the monkey's paw. Ones which will offer to fill a desire for your characters in exchange for unknowable misfortune down the road. It's basically the ye old version of, would you swallow the pill that gives you $10 billion, but you're on fire for the rest of your life. A good example of this is the future devil from Chainsaw Man, one who offers Aki a great deal of powers so long as they can live inside of Aki's eye just to be present and witness his tragic death. Now, I won't spoil any of the anime watchers with what happens to Aki, but I will say that this is an interesting way to write a creature of misfortune. This type of monster is not one who inflicts misfortune upon the characters with their bargain, but instead knows that the misfortune is going to happen regardless, and so makes an offer which best suits themselves and exploits that unavoidable misfortune. These creatures are often neutral or chaotic when it comes to dealing with your protagonists. They are the ones who control what they can while knowing exactly what they cannot. The future devil, for example, does not tell Aki how he is going to die, or why it will be so tragic, but he knows that it is unavoidable, and so he might as well have a front row seat to it. He's paying for a ticket by giving Aki powers. In a case like this, there really isn't any reason for the characters to deny such a bargain, especially when the bargain benefits them greatly. However, it's also a great way to foreshadow future tragedy and put the audience in the same shoes as your characters. After all, what else would you do in this type of situation? The powers that are granted to you might help you regardless, but they will not save you from your fate. That is the deal, and it is the inevitability of that misfortune which makes it so compelling. It's an indifferent misfortune, not one that is inflicted upon the characters with malice or intent. Of course, longtime viewers of the channel will know that I myself have created a creature of misfortune. The Osazi is one of many true monsters in my world setting, which is to say that they are a creature that is born from evil, which reproduces by breaking and corrupting the souls of living creatures, and not through any biological means. The Osazi has a few key abilities which are described in my story. The first is that they are unkillable and cannot be harmed by anything. Even the gods themselves, who can rewrite the laws of reality, cannot overwrite an Osazi's law of immunity. The reason this monster possesses such a trait is because, in addition to their immunity to any harm, they themselves cannot bring any direct harm to anyone as well. Instead, the Osazi brings harm through misfortune. The only being in existence which can harm the Osazi is the Osazi itself. And while the Osazi might be immune to all damage, any damage that it inflicts upon itself is permanent. It may even fester and grow disease. The Osazi is one of the most dangerous Maliki in my world because the only one who is guaranteed to survive the misfortune it brings is its target. After all, the Osazi's goal is not to unalive the target, but rather have the target unalive themselves. And the only way to defeat an Osazi, as the target of one, is to survive and persevere through the tragedies that it inflicts upon you, until the Osazi inevitably succumbs to its own wounds. Imagine, if you will, a creature which only you are ever allowed to see, one which takes your ability to speak its name or warn others about. A creature who stalks you wherever you go, who cannot be killed nor harmed nor stopped. One which can only succumb to its own wounds, as each time it harms itself, it inflicts a moment of tragedy and misfortune upon you. Your loved ones are not safe. Your dreams and aspirations will be obstructed and squandered. And soon you will be left in solitude as you lament how your life could have been different if you had just been a bit luckier. That is the horror of the Osazi as it looms above and waits for you to succumb to the numerous tragedies it has inflicted upon you. Should you ever unalive yourself, you will rise again as a new Osazi with a fresh body to take even more victims. This is one of the many ways you can use unfortunate creatures in your story. Monsters who are not the victims of misfortune, but who use misfortune as their power. These are beings who bend fate itself in their favor, who the characters must overcome. After all, that too is a natural part of the human condition. Oftentimes, it seems that the most unfortunate creatures of all are human beings. After all, how can anyone be so unlucky if we cannot first understand our own misfortune? Yes, we have the capacity to think and understand the world around us, but it is at the cost of our ignorant bliss. We live in a world where the more we know about something, the more we are made aware of the things that we do not know. And it is the things that we do not know which frighten us the most. Our knowledge is both a boon and a curse in equal parts. And the most unfortunate thing about humanity is that we gain knowledge much faster than we gain wisdom. And yet, I think all of us would still prefer awareness over ignorance. Because the truth about misfortune and luck itself is that it's a simple matter of chance and probability which our brains cannot fully comprehend. It will happen to us regardless of whether we know it is going to happen, and in some cases, perhaps knowing about misfortune allows us to fight against it. When we use this concept in our stories, we can often get too focused on the single unfortunate event we are presented with. Let's say that we have a character who is destined to die when they fight an antagonist in the story. We know that it is unavoidable, and that there is nothing anyone can do to keep this character alive. However, there are quite a few things which can make this a more pleasant outcome in our stories. For example, if this character knows that they're going to die, they can also work to ensure that they are the only ones who die in that moment. If this fated character accepts their death but will not accept the death of their friends, then their sacrifice could be what helps others in the story to survive. Perhaps this character uses that finality to do everything they've been putting off. They might start a family, check off some things from their bucket lists, or sow seeds which might grow and help the people they care about in the future long after they die. For moments like these, I encourage you to think about all the ways in which you can make a character's destiny bittersweet instead of copping out and going back on that fated tragedy or finding a loophole. After all, I think it would be a lot more lame for a character like this to die and then get resurrected soon after as some sort of deus ex machina. Allow your characters to experience the thing which you promised to the audience, but also think about all the things you have not promised, and all the things which put a new perspective on that destined tragedy. When it comes to random chance and bad luck, we often want to attribute meaning to things where there is none to be found. We want to think that bad things happen to bad people because they deserve it. However, most of us also intuit that this is not the case. We instinctively know that luck is indifferent. It always has been, and it always will be. We consider our personal desires to be almost profane in a way that they can make us sacrifice our future for the sake of the present. We tell stories of Faustian bargains where characters accept the deal because they cannot foresee the ways in which misfortune will screw them over, even when they know that it's a risk. It's a reason why people get so addicted to gambling. We accept the risk of failure because the reward is something we see in front of us. And even though we might know the consequences of failure, we might think ourselves different and above misfortune. We are all only one good roll away from becoming millionaires, even as we spiral down into the depths of poverty and addiction. But what about when we can guarantee the reward at the price of a consequence we cannot know? In a way, the things we know end up making us more ignorant, not less. It's the carrot on a stick, the bait on a line, something we desire which is dangled in front of us to distract us from the grim fate which lies just out of our comprehension. It's the idea that we know we will have millions of dollars in the morning, while also not understanding that we will lose it all the next day, or that we could die the next morning before we can even use that money. Because while creatures of misfortune are meant to explain luck and probability, they are also a reflection of our guilt surrounding what we desire. Many of us inherently dream of having things handed to us. We dream of winning the lottery or making a big risky investment on a stock or cryptocurrency before it goes to the moon. We all instinctively know there will be a cost to our desires. The world does not give handouts, and it does not offer us a reward without a risk. We gain knowledge at the price of our peace of mind, and we gain wisdom at the cost of either someone else's misfortune or our own. Good luck comes at the price of bad luck, and life at the cost of death. The more we care about things, the more it hurts when those things are taken away from us. And yet, if we were to try and isolate our emotions and remain indifferent or uncaring to everything as a method to avoid getting hurt, we would all inevitably become a little less human as well, wouldn't we? So when it comes down to death, luck, misfortune, and all these other things which you cannot control, it's important to instead think about the things that you can control. So in this moment, control how you act and what you care about. Take care, heed an owl's wisdom, and start writing.